Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Conference of Consulting Actuaries Leadership Development interview series. My name is Michael Clark, host of the podcast. I'm a past president of the CCA, managing director at Agilis based in Denver, Colorado. I'm joined today by Flick Fornia, who is my guest. He is the president of Pension Trustee Advisors, a firm that he created almost 15 years ago. Flick's an expert in public sector retirement plans. He's worked for a number of different firms before he started his own firm. We'll talk a little bit about that on our episode today. He is a past board member of the SOA, where he also served as secretary treasurer. A couple of other interesting tidbits about Flick. He was one of a dozen founding members of the CCA's public plans community. At one point, he was working as an actuary in Brazil, which, again, we're going to talk a little bit about. And he and I were chatting just before we started recording today. He's actually been on this side of the podcast, being the interviewer for several SOA podcasts. So we get to put him in the interviewee chair today. So I'm excited to have Flick on our program. Flick, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I'm looking forward to this.
Now, Flick, there was one other thing as I was putting together some notes for our conversation today that jumped out at me that I wanted to ask you right off the bat. On your LinkedIn profile, looking at where you went to college, you have noted there that you were involved with KWCW radio. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, it had 10 watts of power. It was a college radio station in Walla Walla, where I went to Whitman College back in the late 70s. It was a lot of fun. I had just a 3-hour radio show once a week, and it was really fun. I was a math major. When I started out, I was actually pre-med, but the weeder course did its weeding, and I was just going to be a math major. And then, but that was one of my hobbies there. It was great fun. I was really into music at the time, popular music from the 1970s and beyond and before. I had to get a radio license, and I'm sure other people listening have been radio broadcasters in college too. It's pretty fun. It's like a high school thing. I played oldies, so like 60s music, and that was very unique back in the late 70s. There weren't a lot of oldies stations. There was none in the Seattle area.
Okay, wait. So you were saying that in the 70s, 60s were considered oldies?
Exactly. I had this 1974 rule. I would only play things before 1974. And I got to tell you, some people hated it. I remember one person saying, "Play some Blue Oyster Cult, man." That's all they wanted. They called up like every 20 minutes. "We're having a party. It's be a boring party if you don't play any Blue Oyster Cult." But I didn't.
All right. So what was your favorite record to spin then?
Oh, gosh. Well, I had a segment called Roots of Punk because punk rock was just coming out. So I'd play anything from like the Animals or maybe early Rolling Stones that you could argue or like Louie that you could argue were roots of punk. Then I'd mix in something that clearly wasn't roots of punk, like Julie, 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 Do You Love Me, or something along those lines. Michael, I'm before your time, but maybe some of our listeners will recognize these.
and for those that don't, that's why we have Spotify and other channels like that people can go,
I guess we should be having background music to this podcast. But let's not talk about music anymore, even though it's fun. Oh, let me mention one thing, though. Rick Roeder, who some of you might know, wrote a book on popular music from the 60s. I found this out 20 years ago. He's the son of one of the founders of Gabe Roeder and Smith, where I'd worked for a couple of years.
Okay.
But he was into that. A lot of music and math, I think, often go hand in hand.
Oh, agree. I'm a big concert goer myself. I was just taking inventory and on the various shows that I'm going to go see this summer as well out here in Colorado, where both Flick and I happen to live. So,
yeah. All
right. Well, yeah. Let's change topics here a little bit. Let's get it more back towards the actuarial bend of things. I mentioned, as part of the introduction here, that you've worked in a variety of different places. Walk us through your career, how you started, and where you ended up today.
Yeah. So I graduated from high school or college in 1979. I had a summer internship at Safeco and life insurance back in Seattle. I had just recently decided that I was going to perhaps be an actuary. And I applied, back then there was no internet or ways to figure out where there might be jobs. And I just wrote to like all 50 largest insurance companies I could find around the country. And sure enough, Safeco was the only one that replied, which is from Seattle, which is where my parents lived. So that was great. I worked Dale Yamamoto, who was fairly active in the CCA and SOA. He was a brand new ASA. I worked for him as well as a couple of other people in the summer of 1979, and then I was graduating early in December, and I accepted a full-time job with Safeco. And the really cool thing for me is I was able to take independent study that fall semester, and I studied for exams, and I passed. I had passed part one, which is math, gotten a 5 on part two, which is probably in statistics, but I had taken it a year earlier, so I knew I'd pass that again if I just studied. But I passed 2, 3, and 4A all in this one segment, which
Wow.
at the time they were just fractional exams. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was kind of great to come out of exams. And back then, inflation was so high. I got a 14% raise every 6 months for like my first 3 or 4 years of my career between the exam days and 5 or 10% inflation.
Wow.
Worked there for about a year. Dale had gone to Boeing. He was their first corporate actuary. And for those of you that know Seattle, or even those that don't, Boeing is the big dog in town. My father had worked for Boeing as an engineer. His father had worked for Boeing on the line. And I went to work for Dale and was there for about 4 years. I got my ASA then, and I actually left Boeing briefly to take a job with Milliman in the health consulting area. Milliman was the big star in Seattle. That's where they're from. I was down the hall from Stuart Robertson. It was a good job, but I worked too hard, and I was kind of maybe not goof off, but I didn't like to work as hard as I did. And Dale had left Boeing, and my old job opened up, so went back to Boeing. Then let's see. So my first few years, I really had a handful of jobs. I joined Towers Perrin, TPF&C, they were called at the time, in Seattle in 1986, I guess it was. And then I got my FSA when I was there. That was great. I knew them well. They were Boeing's actuaries. I knew the people there. It was a great place to work. And after 2 years, there was a posting for a job in São Paulo, Brazil. And so I'm 29 years old. They were looking for someone that had been an FSA for 5 years, certain level at Towers. I think consultant was the title, and had spoke Portuguese. Well, I was not that level. I'd been an FSA for about a year, and I didn't speak Portuguese, but I had AP credit in German. Anyway, I was the only one that applied. So I got the job, went down to Brazil, married Gwen, who I'd worked with briefly as an actuary a few years earlier. And it was a fun experience. So I'm 29 years old. We were living like kings. That's back when the expatriates were really compensated well. And it was just really fun. The economy was in the toilet. We had 1% inflation per day for quite a amount of time I was there. So as an actuary, it was fascinating because you go into a store and you can buy, let's say you want to buy a couch. You buy the couch, they either offer it to you with 3 payments with no interest, 3 monthly payments with no interest, or 40% discount. So that's like a little A3. Solve for the imputed inflation rate for little A3 and figure out which the better deal. I mean, I don't know how those people survived, because inflation was so high, you just completely lose track of everything.
Of your purchasing power and all of that. Yeah, that would be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, we were paid mostly in dollars, so we could keep track of things because you knew a gallon of milk should cost $1 or $2. But for them, last month a gallon of milk was 3,000 cruzados, and this month it's 4,000 cruzados. Is that to live in that life is just really hard. And hyperinflation, we all learned in college about the wheelbarrows back in Weimar Germany of cash that you had to have. Well, with the computers in the 1980s, in early 1990s, you didn't need that. It was possible. You didn't need to carry all this cash because we balanced our checkbook every day, because every check cleared in one day, and and you'd call the bank to tell them how much of your money you wanted invested in the interest-bearing overnight account. You get about 1% in interest. Um, and like one of my clients, sorry, I'm going on and on, but I thought this was so much fun. One of my clients was the tobacco company. They made all their money on the fact that when you sell a pack of cigarettes, let's say for 1,000 cruzados, 25% of that is tax. That's what's that, 250 cruzados. But the government doesn't require you pay the tax for another 2 months. So the end of the quarter. So by the time you pay the tax, you've made so much money on the float. And it's a hard place to do business, which is probably one of the reasons that I got sent back after 3 years, because the Towers parent wasn't making any money and I was really expensive. So I moved back to Denver and worked for them for another 6 years.
So up to this point in your career, so starting at Safeco, where you were doing life insurance, is that right? Or were you
It
doing
was
health?
I was in health.
Health.
Yeah.
Okay. So and same thing with Boeing, doing health work, or were you
Mostly pensions at Boeing. They just put in retiree healthcare plans. So some open. And the new FAS 106, I guess it was, rules were coming out about then. So I was a little involved.
All right. So started out doing health, kind of dabbled a bit in pensions at Boeing. Down in Brazil,
sorry, Michael, I say the opposite. Started out in health, went to Boeing, was almost exclusively pensions, but dabbled in health.
Okay.
And then since then I've been, 80, 90% pensions and a little bit of retiree healthcare.
Okay. So you came back, worked for Towers Parent for a while. And then since then you worked for several other firms and kind of specializing more in the public sector. How did that come about? Like, because you were obviously corporate at Boeing and
but
you're
TPF&C, that good question, Michael. So Towers, I was at Towers for 10 years, and almost all those 10 years were, corporate pensions. We had TPF&C in Denver or Towers Parent, I guess they were called then, was pretty successful. We had a lot of great clients. We had Coors. Although I didn't work on Coors, we had the phone company, and then I bid on and won the Wyoming retirement system. So that we didn't do a bunch of public pensions back then, and Towers now doesn't do any, I don't believe. But back then they'd done a handful. I think they had Nebraska, they had a couple in bunch of California, and I won Wyoming retirement system. And then after 10 years at Towers, I joined Buck, and Buck back then and even now is one of the stronger public pension consulting firms. And then we won Colorado Fire and Police, we won Colorado Para, we won some of the Wyoming or Oklahoma systems. I won Wyoming. So we were really successful in getting public pension plans. And then Buck already had South Dakota, so they were pretty prominent in public pensions in this area. And then so after 8 years at Buck, I started the GRS, Gabriel Roeder and Smith office here in Denver, which was just exclusively public pensions. And I've been almost exclusively public pensions ever since. I've had a couple little assignments here and there. I'm still enrolled, but I haven't signed a Schedule B, I don't think, since 1990. No, 97 rather. Yeah. So it's been a while.
So you moved through these different corporations, and then about 15 years ago, you set up shop to work for yourself. Talk to us about that process of starting your own firm and what that was like.
Well, I was laid off. So I was at GRS for 3 years after I opened the office. Then Aon, talked me into trying to build a national public pension practice. And I'd say we failed. I mean, I didn't get much. I don't think we ever had even $1 million worth of business that I was responsible for in public pensions. And as those of you that work in public pensions know, some of these companies, it's hard for them to work in public pensions because they're just not geared towards the lower rates and the higher risk of liability. And I got late when Aon bought. I used to joke Aon bought Hewitt, so they had to get rid of me to afford them. Not quite true, but at the same time, Aon, was acquiring Hewitt. Within a couple months of then, I was laid off. And I'd already worked at a lot of these firms, and I just didn't want to go back to them. So I thought, well, maybe I can try this. I was going to consult to pension trustees, and that's why I named my firm Pension Trustee Advisors. And my idea was to do kind of the same thing that a couple other firms are doing now, where you do trustee education. I was going to do videos maybe, and I started working on that, but I just kept getting paid consulting work. A couple of my clients from Aon had, I did not compete, but there was, for a variety of reasons, I was able to get some of those. Um, kept me on. I got a couple new assignments, and it just gradually became successful. I was what was I, 50, 51 maybe? And I wasn't expecting to be as successful as I was. And I'll never forget, I was talking to a guy named Alan Dick, who was one of my best friends that I'd worked with in Towers, who had left them after 10 years or so and started his own business. He said, Flick, there's a chance that you might make more money on your own than you did at the consulting firm. It's like, really? And I'm not sure I'm making that much more money than I was at the consulting firms, but it's sure a lot more fun. Being on your own is great if you have the work. If you don't have the work, it's pretty stressful.
Yeah.
But as long as you got enough money to do as long as you got enough work to get paid well, it's really great.
So talk to me a little bit about that experience being let go from Aon. So yeah, I like that you're pretty forthright about that you were brought in to build a national public sector practice, and it didn't pan out. What did you learn from that experience of coming in with this idea of, hey, we're going to build this thing, have it not work out? Like that's got to be devastating at some level. But reflecting back on that, like, what did you learn out of that?
Oh gosh. Well, it felt wrong pretty early on, and it felt too difficult pretty early on. And I know during the 4 years, there were 2 jobs I applied for that I really, really, really wanted and was pretty well qualified for, and was one of the finalists, and I didn't get with other entities. And my managers had, I guess it was really hard on your self-esteem, but I knew I was pretty good, and I was, so Aon did give me a ton of rope. I went to a lot of conferences. I became involved, like this. I think you mentioned the CCA. Public plan community. I think that was started when I was still at Aon. I can't remember, but I had a lot of rope to like network, I really loved it. I didn't love knowing I wasn't doing a good job from their point of view. But it was, I did a ton of speeches. I visited lots of different Aon offices and talked to people there that sometimes they sold work. It was enjoyable, but it was not, I knew it was not working. And my boss that hired me left shortly thereafter. And the person that replaced him, at one point he was meeting with me, he said, Flick, why are we even in this business? And I said, well, you tell me. You're the one that wanted me to be. You guys wanted me to be in this business. And then they're still, they've got a reasonable amount of public sector work. They do a bunch in investment consulting. So it's public sectors are very important to that firm, but they're just not one of the major ones right now in that that the firms I used to work with compete with. Oh, and sorry, Michael, let me divulge a tiny bit, or deviate. I don't compete with these old firms. My clients now are like tangential to the classic public pension actuary consulting firm. So it means I got to get along with all these other actuaries, because right now there's a city in Texas where I'm working for the city, and another firm is working for the pension fund. And there's a little bit of tension, often in public pensions, that unlike corporate pensions, where usually the corporation and the pension are like the same thing, right? Like Michael, and your clients aren't all of your board members. Yeah, but in the public pension space, it's different. There's the government that sponsors the pension is not the same as the entity that does it. Like in Colorado, I've done quite a few jobs for the state of Colorado. I've worked for the Colorado auditor. I've worked for the county that you and I live in, or the health department in the county that you and I live in. And we're like not exactly adversaries with the Public Employee Retirement Association. That's a Siegel client. That's probably one of Siegel's most important clients. But I'm working for the outside party. Sometimes I work for the labor unions, and
so you're working with the different stakeholders of these
exactly
systems, right?
I work with a different stakeholder. And sometimes it's like in Detroit bankruptcy. I worked for the banks in Europe that had loaned money to the city. And, so there's this big, or issues on how to value the pension when they're divvying up the assets. So I'm working for this outside stakeholder. I didn't work for the city. I didn't work for the pension fund. I worked for, Deutsche Bank and a coalition of other banks. And that's been really fun for me. Because for most of my early career, I worked for the pension funds. I testified at various legislatures and got to know a lot of the plans. I still know a lot of the people at the plans, but they're rarely, only about a quarter of my work, less than that, is for the plans. So the title of my company is a little bit misleading, Pension Trustee Advisors. I usually am not working for the pension trustees. I'm working for somebody else. But
No,
it's worked out well.
And for those that end up watching this on YouTube, if you're looking at the picture that's just over Flick's shoulder there, you can see that's the courtroom artist sketch of Flick testifying during the Detroit bankruptcy proceedings, right?
Yeah, but wait a minute, you didn't tell me this was on YouTube.
Yeah, I told you had to be camera ready.
No, I don't think he did. I thought we were just going to chat. No,
We are going to chat.
I wore a collared shirt.
It's on YouTube. It's on all of our different podcast channels. We give people options.
And this corny coffee cup that my wife gave me, I didn't think this would be on the camera.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. Hey, let's round out the discussion here on your career. So talking about so you've been working for yourself for the last 15 years, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself from 15 years ago about the journey you were about to go on?
Oh God. I don't know, Michael. Yeah, I know you wrote this question out like I should be prepared for it. I think there's so many things that are, I don't want to say random, but like when I was at Aon and I knew I was not succeeding, I often would think back to some of these other jobs that I quit too early. Because I mentioned I had 4 or 5 jobs and then worked for Towers for 10 years and Buck for 8 years. So, I had some stability in the middle, but I was worried because it's, especially later in your career, it's not that easy to get another job. Mm-hmm. And I mean, perfect example of why I'm in Colorado. When Towers transferred me from Rio de Janeiro back, the economy was collapsing. They wanted me to come back to the States. I had a choice. I wanted to go back to Seattle, but they didn't need someone with my skill set in Seattle, not, for a FSA with 5 years of experience or whatnot, there's not always a job at a certain company in a certain location. Mm-hmm. And they said, how about Denver? I was also considering Puerto Rico or Hong Kong, but we'd had the foreign adventure thing. So I took this anyway. I'm sorry, I'm diverging again. My point is, the last 14 years have been fantastic. It's been so much fun. There's nothing more fun than being on your own, doing interesting stuff, and getting paid well. But the month before I got that job, I had no idea what might happen. I mean, maybe I would hang on to Aon another 10 years and retire with a mediocre career. I maybe one of these other jobs I wanted would have hit. But I look at some of the jobs I really wanted and didn't get. It's like, wow, that worked out pretty well that I didn't get that job, because everything now is so great. It's not that great, but it's pretty. So,
but you're having fun, which is an important thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But I guess the thing, I just try to do your best, and well, this is not exactly your question, but as actuaries, most of us are very focused on the numbers and getting those right. And that's obviously paramount. But one thing I think where I've been successful is I really wrestle to try to understand exactly what my clients are trying to figure out. Now, maybe in a lot of, like, if I was signing Schedule Bs only, that might not be that important. But for my work now, I need to know what their question is, and try to figure out what's important to them. And the more I can get inside their head, for one thing, the more I get inside their head, the better I can explain what I know that they don't know, like the numbers, mm-hmm. or figure out which numbers they want to know. and that's hard. Um, and I've been, my whole career I've tried to do that, and it's challenging, but I think it's so helpful. Um, someone you and I know, also from Colorado, Gene Wicks was the head of the Towers office 6 years I was here in Denver, and he was incredibly successful. He later became one of the senior people at Towers Watson, and I think he's retired by now. But he was so good that the clients at understanding what they needed to know and wanted to know. And then, of course, when you're good at that, you're good at explaining it to them too. So I learned a lot. And there's a lot of other people I've learned from too, Paul Schrader, just Dale, zillions. But it's important, I think, to try to really get inside your client's head. And another way to do that too is, when they ask you like, how much is this going to cost to make this benefit change? Try to do it on the back of an envelope first, because that's what they're doing, and that'll help you get a good idea as to, like in my case, I do a lot of these labor negotiations. The union will say, we want these 10 benefit improvements, and I'll tell them which ones cost a lot, which ones don't cost a lot. And it's very valuable for them going into negotiations saying, well, we can't ask for that. Like a COLA, cost of living adjustment, generally costs a lot. And I can help them figure that out. But I want to get inside their head and figure out how they're doing that so I can help them make the decisions to do that. I know that's not exactly your question. Yours is more career-based. I don't know. Just try to do a good job. Try to be good to people. And if you're lucky like I was, things will come around. I mean, I've had 5 or 6 of my biggest clients have just happened because of a few things that worked out well, and
well, I think what's interesting in what you've said, right, is you look back, and even that time at Aon that ended in I guess what we'll call failure, but what it allowed you to do in the meantime in terms of speaking and networking and all of these things, in a lot of ways made it possible for you to be successful with your current company, right? And so you just never know what to expect, and so taking advantage of those opportunities, you just never know where they're going to lead down the road. But so take advantage, right? That's probably the best thing, is take advantage of those opportunities when they come your way, because you never know how they're going to benefit you in the future.
Yeah, no, I like the way you said it. In Portuguese, there's a phrase called aproveitar, take advantage. And I remember when I left Brazil, my boss, who was a comp consultant, not an actuary, but he was pretty insightful. He said, Flick, one advice I got to give you is to preencher vagas, to fill the space, occupy spaces. Like in soccer, I guess. I don't play soccer, but the Brazilians play pretty good soccer. The idea is you make sure you get in those spaces so you can clear. And he was right. You just gotta occupy the spaces. Try to take advantage of things that might come up, or just make yourself available. I mean, so many of my client successes have just happened to be a few things here and there. Well, my biggest client, just about 5 things happened. Is that, they went out to bid for a project that seemed like a total long shot. I didn't like bidding on things because bidding takes a lot of work. And when you're a big firm, you just do them all. You just bid on everything.
Yeah.
But when you're on your own, I can't afford to spend that much time. But anyway, I happened to be sitting next to someone on a bus at a conference that said, Flick, you really should bid on this. I happened to have met with someone a month earlier saying this thing's gone out to bid. And I thought it was a waste of time. It's something I bid on at Aon 4 times and never got. But then all of a sudden I'm on my own, and by a fluke, a real fluke, it was one of these totally undefined jobs. There were 7 firms. 2 of them were clearly, in my opinion, the most competent. But one of them bid 150,000, one of them bid 900,000, and the other 5 of us all bid 250. So it looked like the 2 that were the most competent didn't know what they were doing, when in fact the project wasn't defined well. So we got really lucky. And I was one of really 5 bidders that were taken seriously. And Paul Schrader, who I think I mentioned, is a retired actuary that was with Buck in Denver for many years. He's been in South Dakota's actuary for 50 years. He's excellent. Anyway, I got him to partner with me and Linda Borneval for this job, and we won it. They went out to Ohio. I was actually giving a speech in Malaysia at the time, because I had been asked to give a speech in Malaysia. I certainly wasn't going to turn that down for a long shot finalist presentation. But it's just so many things are just luck. But you know, I've gotten burned quite a few times too. I've gotten jobs that I didn't think I should get, and I've not gotten jobs that I really think I should have gotten. You know, I'm sure you're the same way, right, Michael? I mean, you
Oh
do
yeah.
a lot of this work, but
Yeah, the ones that
you
you
know,
think are sure things don't necessarily always pan out, and the ones that you think you have a shot at somehow materialize. It's great. So
yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah. And
part of the
sometimes,
fun.
yeah, it really is fun, and that I really enjoy that part of my work. Um, yeah, let me just say another anecdote. So before, when I was working for the big firms, my favorite thing to do was to try to get the work. Or, you know, my second favorite thing to do was do the work, and my third favorite thing was doing my bills. And then once you're on your own, it flips like that. I mean, my bill, I've already gotten paid. What's today? The 19th. I got paid for my biggest client for work I did in March. You know, I got that bill out on April 5th, and they paid me on April 19th. You know, and the second favorite thing to do is just, if you've got billable work in front of you, you know, that's hundreds of dollars an hour you're not getting if you don't do it.
Yeah.
And then I still like trying to get to work, but it really is interesting how, you know, because when you work for another company, you still get paid whether your clients have paid you or not.
Mhm.
And I now know why companies are always so tough on you to try to get your bills out, because it really is a pretty important part of doing business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about your volunteer experience because you've been volunteering for a number of years. In fact, I was thinking about it as we started this conversation. I don't know if you remember this, but you and I actually met because you were a facilitator at a fellowship admissions course that I happened to be attending as a newly minted, almost newly minted fellow back in December of 2010 down in Dallas, of all places, and that's where we actually met face to face. I had heard your name before because you know but that's where we actually met for the first time face to face. So.
Oh, I had forgotten that, Michael. Thanks. So we never met at Western Pension because you were always very active in
You
volunteering
know,
at the
but
Western Pension.
that was years after my FSA. No, the first time we actually met was at a fellowship
Oh,
admissions
funny.
course. So,
Were you at Mercer? No, where were you working?
yeah, I started my career at Mercer, and that's where I got my
Okay.
FSA. So
Yeah, that was
yeah, yeah.
fun. I ran
So
the Dallas White Rock Marathon that week. That was fun.
so you've been
Yeah,
volunteering. You've been
so
volunteering a lot, right? Let's talk about where did you get
yeah.
started?
Okay, well, I guess actually I remember um April of, or summer of 1979 when Dale was a brand new ASA and Safeco, like he went to his SOA meeting to give some presentation on technology of some kind. So he was a volunteer giving a speech there, and I was really impressed with that. And then as I'm taking my exams, people would encourage me, you know, when you pass your exams. I mean, I guess this is still the case. When you pass your exams, you know, maybe go get on an exam committee and you write the questions and then you grade the exams. So I did that for a couple of years. And actually that was great because I did it when I was in Brazil. And so I got a trip back to the States to grade exams once or twice. And that was fun, although I just hated it. Writing exams, I did not like that at all because the questions are so tedious and the answering, but so I stopped doing that and then moved to the States. So let's see, 1992 or so, had been an FSA for 5 years. I'd been back in the States for 2 years. And so it's a little bit of a long story. It was kind of cute. So at the time, I was still hoping to move back to Seattle. And I got a call from Doug Holden at Milliman in Portland, who was very charismatic. I think he's retired many years ago, but a really fun guy. I worked with him at Safeco as a summer intern. He had become a principal at Milliman, went down to Portland, was very successful. And he calls me and says, Flick, I've got something that's going to change your life. And I thought, oh, good, you know, I can move back to the Northwest. He's offering me a job at Milliman in Portland. But it's no, we've got this committee, the Enrolled Actuaries Program Committee, and we need someone from Towers. And I suggested you. And I said, oh, okay. And I volunteered for that. And that I really enjoyed. That was so I was on that committee for about 8 years. Um, it was a very tight-knit group of people. Some of my best friends were on there. And you know, we put on the EA meeting. I mean, now the CCA does the EA meeting. And oh God. And that was Once the CCA took over the administrative part, it was great. But the first few years, we were arguing over like whether to serve orange juice. I mean, this was in the 1990s. All this stuff and trying to figure out hotels and stuff. But eventually, CCA took over the administration. It started going very well. We also made a bunch of great improvements early on. We never changed the program because once a session was taken off the program list, it was like lost forever. So eventually we started reformulating, and a lot of great people on that committee: Amy Wiener, Larry Scher, Don Siegel, dozens more that I probably should mention. We just did a good job at restructuring that. Already was a successful meeting, but it became even more successful. So I did that for quite a few years. Let's see. Then I guess the CCA program committee. Oh no, I'm sorry. When I joined GRS, started the GRS Denver office, I was worried about continuing ed because I was enrolled and I wanted to stay enrolled. And Dale suggested that I do the fellowship admission courses because it's like a dirty little secret. That counts as professionalism. So even though and that counts as core credit, because to become enrolled, you need core credit and non-core credit. Well, I get tons of non-core credit, but core credit, I don't want to relearn the 401A17 or all these goofy regs I'll never need to deal with. And so that gave me a fair amount of core credit. And I've done one of those pretty much every year. Those are really fun, but they're kind of sought after for volunteers, the fellowship admission courses. So I'm fortunate to have been on their faculty for, I guess, about 2004 was my first year. And yeah, you get to meet great people like you in the process of doing it.
So that's interesting that some of your volunteer work actually came out of necessity, and then just continued doing it because, well, presumably you liked it more than just what you got out of it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Michael. Because there was a CCA professionalism committee. I was on there for a few years. I didn't do a whole lot, and it was okay. It was somewhat interesting. And even like the academy, or maybe it's an academy professionalism committee. I apologize for not remembering. This is still back in the 90s. And then the CCA public plans community was huge because, back at that time, would be around, 2008 or so, there was no public plans community anywhere. Public plan actuaries were kind of orphans. There was a retirement section in the SOA, but the public plans people didn't have much presence. ASPA didn't have anything. And we were really fortunate that the timing was such that CCA kind of embraced formulating this committee, because a lot of us didn't know much. I don't even know if I was a member. I guess I was a member of the CCA. That volunteering, some of it's out of necessity. And then as you're later in your career, this stuff's really important. There's policy decisions I want other actuaries to talk to about, and I testified to GASB. That's kind of voluntary work too. A lot of these things are like that, and it's fun. I mean, especially when you're making a difference in some way.
So when you think back on your volunteering, one thing we didn't touch on was your SOA board experience, but what are some of the things that you've gained from volunteering?
Well, connections, knowledge, credit, I guess in some cases. He ain't core credit. Connections are huge. Because I know, like I had someone call me once, maybe on one of the chats, asking some technical question about drop. And this was a fairly, maybe someone in their 40s, let's say, that was not as experienced as me. And he was a little embarrassed to be asking this question to a wide group. And I said, no, this is a hard question. You're okay to not know the answer to this question. And when you can bounce ideas off of other people, you get the confidence. And this person got the confidence, and he asked a group question, and he got some really good answers. I think the information, like I have to be way more knowledgeable about, like ASOP 4, that's a big deal in my little niche, and I wouldn't be nearly as knowledgeable about it if I hadn't been involved in some of these other things. And I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as some of the people I know, but you learn a lot from volunteering. The connections are great, especially for me, because a lot of my work is referred by someone else. Well, you've referred I've probably gotten $25,000, $30,000 of work from you that you referred me to this other actuary. And, you know, I'm sure there's other people listening to this that said, hey, I've referred work to Flick too, and perhaps it's through volunteering and then getting jobs early in my career. The Seattle Actuarial Club, I was the secretary or treasurer, I can't remember. This is before I was even an ASA. We had an actuarial club that had lunches, and I was pretty active in that. Well, that gets you connections to other people that might hire you. So by the time Towers hired me, for example, they already knew who I was. So that helps. And of course it's just nice to do good things. I mean, I don't volunteer that much outside of the actuarial profession, and my wife does tons of stuff, so I'm volunteering for society in a slightly different way than she is. She helps people a lot more in need of help than I do, but it's just a good thing to do.
No, I like what you said there, and I've definitely experienced that as well. Just the networking element of volunteering, even if it's just on a committee, not necessarily a speaking engagement or things like that. There's just people that you would not otherwise have an excuse to interact with that you can then interact with and gain some name recognition and understand who these people are, and it's kind of fun to rub shoulders with people that way.
Oh yeah, and some of them are so damn smart too. Holy cow! Or there's just other things that they just do so well, and it's really inspiring. It's like, how come I can't do that? There's a lot. There's a lot of great people out there.
So what do you think is a common misconception people have about volunteering within the profession?
Oh gosh, I don't know because I don't have it. I've never. I well, maybe this is well. So a couple years ago, I'd been on the SOA board for 6 years. I'd been the treasurer, and I put my name in to run for president or president-elect. And I remember talking to friends and neighbors about that because it's a big job. You've been CCA president, but I think SOA president probably even more work.
I
And
agree.
and I said it's like it's probably like close to a full-time job 1 year and close to a half-time job 2 other years. Now that's a ton of volunteering, but some of my neighbors would say, well, why would you be doing this? And so I think a lot of people just think of volunteering that way because it's not really. I don't even think of it as volunteering. I just think of it as part of my job that's helpful. I mean, is giving a presentation, is that volunteering? Kind of. Um, but you're doing it. I mean, I don't know.
No, I like what you said there though. If you consider it just part of the job, it's not about like what you're giving up to be able to sacrifice some of that time to volunteer, but it's really about there are elements of your professional career that are benefited by participating that way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like when I first joined the EA program committee, I didn't know this professionalism stuff hardly at all. I remember I had a suggestion for a session. Why don't we do a session on all these rules you need to know? And they said, well, we already have like 5 sessions on that, because, so there's things that you just don't know very well because you get in your job, you're just so narrowly focused on what the specifics of the job are.
Yeah, well, and I think back to some of the work that you've done as well at with your current company. I'm assuming, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here or not, but some of that professionalism stuff and getting to really into the weeds on that you may not have done otherwise has come back to benefit you greatly as you're talking about some of the expert witness work that you do and having
Yeah.
to be able to provide testimony about professional standards and whether they were apparently followed or not.
Yeah, no, tons of stuff. And even like I testified to GASB. GASB is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and periodically they consider changes in their accounting standards. And I've testified 3 times to them. And I'm not an expert on GASB by a long shot, but that's on my resume. And if I'm bidding on a job, they can see that I've done that. And yeah, so I was one of the National Association of Bond Lawyers needed experts to revisit if how they wanted to weigh in on some issues on how I can't remember what it says, how bonds report their actual liabilities for their underlying entities. That was quite a bit of work. I had to go to DC on my own dime for 4 or 5 times. But I met some really good people there. I don't know if I've gotten any referrals or not, but it just gave me this great perspective. And yeah, Michael, you had mentioned expert witness work, especially there. The more you can look like an expert, the better. And I'm sure it helps sell some of my clients really appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's round out our discussion on this episode talking about leadership. These are some of the questions that I like to ask everybody that I have on the podcast. So we'll start with, when you think about people that you consider to be successful leaders, what traits do they have? How do they demonstrate their leadership?
Oh gosh. Well, they listen and they try to understand, whoever they're trying to lead, I guess. I'm not even sure I consider myself a leader. Um, I've managed some staff here and there, but yeah, they listen. They try to be nice people. They work hard. Um, they're not duplicitous. I mean, I think, people like it when you're upfront with them. Um, I think that's really important. Yeah, those are the main things. Just try to understand the other person's point of view and what's important.
So when you think about some people that you would consider your role models when it comes to leadership, like how have you tried to emulate their examples in your day-to-day life?
I don't know. I think I'm pretty vain. I'm not sure. I don't know. I guess I just like to look for specific characteristics that I admire in certain people, because there's always plenty of things that you don't, not always, but there's often things that are strengths and weaknesses of people. And I just try to look at their strengths, and see how I can emulate that or take advantage of that. I mean, some people have strengths I can't even imagine being able to do because they're smarter than me, or they know a lot more than I'll know. And it's not at all unusual for me to be working with someone either collaboratively or sometimes in a not adversarial but a opposing point of view, and I see their work and go, holy cow, this is good work. How come I can't do that? So not that often. My work's pretty good. But it's good to just see people that are really good at what they do and try to come up with this. You don't have to be like them in every way. You just need to see what they're really good at.
Well, I think what's interesting about that, I like what you said, because I think when you see somebody who has those traits that you want to emulate, like you said, you may not be able to do it, and it's not to disparage your own skill set or qualities, but if it motivates you to up your game,
Yes.
that's
Yes,
success
yes.
right there, right?
Yeah, no, that's again, I mentioned Paul Schrader before. Man, he has really made me up my game. We'd write a report together and he'd just rewrite half of it. It's like, okay, yeah, that's a lot better than what I wrote. And it hits the point, and it opens some more doors. Um, I was just working with another actuary that I won't name collaboratively, and he said, "No, we got to do it this way." And it's like the right, more rigorous way. It's like, damn, you were right. We really, we really do need to go through the extra rigor to do that.
So
But
So you've
go
been
ahead.
involved with fellowship admissions course. So you've been seeing all of these newly minted FSA credentialed actuaries come through the system. What do you view as imperatives for future successful leaders within the actuarial profession?
Oh gosh, was that in my cheat sheet here? I don't remember that question. Um, um, well, I think kind of what I said, just try to listen to try to get the big picture. And sometimes in the ethics cases we do in there, it's the same thing. Figure out what the big picture is here. What's the and try to relook at it instead of through the eyes of an actuary, through the eyes of the user. Like when we do our work, we very often show our work. We show how we got, the answer is 1.5%. Okay. Well, we show how we got the 1.5%. Well, maybe our client is a lot more interested in learning that the answer is 1.5% than how we got to the 1.5%. So we need to put on their hat. I had a call last week, and the answer, they all they cared about is this number within how does this number compare to that number? Is it close? And the answer was yes, it's close. Now, obviously, I didn't write a report that said yes, it's close, but I focused on that, and then I tried to come back from the high level why it's close, rather than show all our work and boom, yeah, it's close, because that's kind of like focusing on the trees instead of the forest.
Mhm.
You need to know, what forest you're in. You don't need to know, well, bad analogy, but hopefully you see what I'm getting at.
Oh, yeah.
You understand the big picture. Like some of my clients is, there's a bill. They want to know, will this bill pass? What are the strengths and weaknesses of this bill? And so I'll help them analyze that. And I won't focus on how we got there as much as, as the answer.
No, I
And I
appreciate that. That's really good advice.
And especially so most of these FSAs are working in the insurance industry. And so I think there it's a little trickier because, you really are in the weeds more. But the more you can get outside the weeds and figure out what the big picture is here, you're pricing a new product, it needs to sell. You need to figure out, can we make money on this product? And can we sell it? So that's the big question when you're setting a price of something, is it going to be too high or too low?
Interesting. Yeah. No, I like that. I think that's really solid advice, looking at the big picture, because it doesn't matter what type of actuary you are, there's value in that and can actually make you better at the maybe very narrow focus of your day-to-day job, can make you better at it.
Yeah. And there always is a big picture. If there wasn't a big picture, they wouldn't be asking you to do the work.
Yep.
So it's like,
enough.
why am I being asked to do this work? What answers are they expecting? Yeah. Anyway.
No, this has been great. This has been a great discussion, Flick. I appreciate it. And before I let you go, though, I've got one question for you that it's not on your cheat sheet either, so it's not no use looking there. But your name is not actually Flick, but you've gone by Flick for how long now?
Yeah, Flick was my grandfather's name. His name was Emil Willem Fontein, Dutch name. I think he went by Flick from birth in 1910. And I think one of his ancestors was also named Flick. So it's a family nickname. It's not my real name. My real name's William, as you can see if you're looking at Zoom. But that's it. Gwen's got a little, but you're gonna have to talk to her to get that.
All right, fair enough. Well, I want to thank my guest today, Flick Fornia. Flick, if people want to connect with you, what is the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn, or shoot me an email, my pensiontrusteeadvisors.com. Anything with prefix Flick, but LinkedIn's good. And yeah, it's fun. I hope you all have enjoyed the close to an hour we've been chatting.
Yeah,
and
no, it's good.
Shannon, CCA, thanks very much.
No, thank you, Flick. Please subscribe and like this podcast to help us share stories like Flick's that can help benefit the actuarial community. And just as a reminder, the CCA's leadership development community is open to any actuary. You can reach out to CCA to join. I want to thank Shannon Peterson of CCA staff for helping to produce today's event. Join us for upcoming CCA events and follow us online on social media and our website. Thanks again, Flick, for joining us, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks.